Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a slightly earlier interview this morning. I apologize for those technical difficulties we were having over here, a little bit late of a start. My name is Jessica Niddle, and I'm with Dive Rescue International, and there on the right is Justin Fox. He's also with Dive Rescue.
Good morning.
In the middle of your screen is John DeMille of EdgeTech. John, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Yeah.
I have John's bio there in the caption, and I strongly suggest reading it because he has a very impressive resume. But I also wanted to give a quick introduction for those just jumping on here who didn't get a chance to read that. John is currently employed by EdgeTech as a product line engineer with a focus on public safety diving, fire departments, law enforcement, and military applications. He has 45 years of experience working underwater and in the ocean industry, and has trained various departments around the world in side scan sonar operations for over 20 years. If you have any questions for John throughout the interview, or you just want to say hello, please leave us a comment and we'll respond while we're live. Let's jump into the questions. First question, when you began working with Side Scan Sonar, how prevalent was it in the public safety diving field?
Well, I began working with Side Scan Sonar around late 1997, 98 timeframe. And at that time, Side Scan Sonar was not in the public safety world. There was a few recoveries, and the belief back then was human victims couldn't be imaged by sonar because the human body's composed so much water that it wouldn't image. That was proven to be wrong. So working with agencies like Dive Rescue was a big player back then, looking at side scan sonar with Blades Robinson, Pete Gannon, and those guys, working with them, getting introduced to other law enforcement public safety teams. We went out. I traveled quite a bit, assisting communities with recoveries and other agencies until it got to, yes, side scan sonar does work. So in the beginning, in the late 90s, there was no side scan. They were using things like a Lowrance paper chart that they used to locate, and they had some success with it, but not like side scan sonar where you get that visual. Here's the position, conclusive image of, hey, this is the person we're looking for or the object we're looking for.
The Lowrance X65 papergraph sonar is what we were using on our county's dive team. And
right.
I remember I had taken some training actually that you led at an IDRS conference, and we went up for an out-of-county mission, and we were going to use our papergraph sonar to try and find a homicide victim. And the people I was working with said, "Oh, you're using sonar? We have a sonar thingy." And so that piqued my interest. They had never taken it out of the box, and they had bought a very nice system for the time. So I stayed up that evening, put it together, and the first image that sonar thingy ever took, we actually got the victim. So we put together the basics from the Dive Rescue 1, search, witness interviews, things like that, and then the sonar showed him on the very first image. It was kind of a chest beating proud moment.
You gotta like it when they end like that. They don't always end that easily. Where when you have a very good last scene point, you could be there 2-3 days later. So I'm glad to end it quickly for you. Absolutely.
John, what are some of the artifacts found in sonar images, and how do you make good images?
Some of the artifacts you might see in a side scan sonar are features like thermocline. Thermocline is, if you ever dove, you'll notice when you go through a thermocline, it looks like, the best way to describe it, it looks like Italian dressing. You go through, it's like a separation of the water, and you can feel it as a diver. It's colder when you go through it. Well, that bends the sound waves and changes the speed of the beam, which messes up the images. So you might see some thermocline. There's not a lot of good ways to image if you have thermocline. The best thing I can try to do, or anybody that can try to do when they're imaging in a thermocline condition, is to try to get the towfish under that thermocline layer. You might still see it because the beam looks up as well as it looks down. One of the other things you might see in the water are air bubbles. Air bubbles are very reflective. And when you're out there running a side scan sonar operation, it's always best to try and keep other vessels out of the search area because they put air bubbles in the water, and air bubbles are very reflective. One of the examples I use for how reflective an air bubble is, when I was in the military and we do underwater demolition blasting, we would use air bubbles to contain the explosive blasts so that we didn't have the environmental damage outside the area we were using the demolition on. Those air bubbles would stop the explosive blast. That's how reflective an air bubble is in the water column. It will stop, if it'll stop that explosive wave, it's going to stop that sound wave. So some of the other features you might see are water column related. If there's a lot of turbidity, some of the new high frequency sonars, have such good resolution, you might see speckles, especially in the water column portion of the image. Fish, if you have a large school of fish, you're going to see them very well. And if they're over top of the target you're looking for, they're going to hide that target. So those are some of the artifacts you might see. What was the second part of that question? I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. How do you make good images?
Making a good image, I'm a firm believer in the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. You can go into all these theories about what's going on, but to make a good image, it's real simple. You get the towfish the right height above the bottom, and you drive your boat in a straight line. And the steadier you can get that towfish to fly, the crisper that image is going to be. So don't make it complicated. Get the towfish the right height above the bottom, and it's a rule of thumb, 10% of the range you're imaging on, and drive the boat as straight as you can possibly drive it. And you're going to get the best possible image for that condition.
John, I just want to expand on something that you touched on there. You mentioned high frequency with high turbidity water, you're going to have a lot of artifact. So if you have the ability to select a frequency range and you have very turbid water, would a lower frequency typically be a better choice?
It would. You know, I've imaged in some pretty black water. I've never been in water too black where I couldn't get a good image. Sometimes the range might be slightly reduced, but certainly a lower frequency that has more thump is going to break through more of that turbidity, and you may not see it. The lower the frequency, the more thump that wave has. That's why for sonars that they use for imaging sub-bottom, where they want to look down into the sediment, that's a very low frequency because that sound wave has more of a thump. So yes.
And I'm going to throw a question at you that there is no right answer. I get that, but for most public safety dives, we're talking under 40 feet or less than 40 feet of depth and probably low visibility water, looking for a body. Do you have a frequency range that you typically recommend?
You know, typically I like to stay around, for my searching portion, I'll stay around 900 kilohertz because that gives me really good range. And I certainly have the resolution that when I get an image, I'm going to have a pretty good feeling of, hey, this is the object I'm looking for. If I get a target that I can't really explain and I want to get a better image of it, I might switch over to my high frequency to get a better look and get better resolution. Some of these high frequencies are so short ranged, and the fact that you got to keep that towfish so close to the bottom, it makes it difficult to operate them. So using a lower frequency and a larger range, you can keep that towfish off the bottom and make your life a lot easier without smacking the towfish into the bottom every 100 feet.
Right. Makes for interesting images when you do that. Ask me how I know. Perfect. Thanks, John.
John, so how do you interpret sonar images?
Side Scan Sonar imagery, if you take the acronym Side Scan Sonar SSS, those just remember 3 S's, Side Scan Sonar: shape, size, shadow. does the shape meet what you expect that target to look like? If you're looking for a victim, does it look like a victim? If you're looking for a boat, does it look like a boat, or an airplane or any object? Does it look like that? The second one is size. When you measure it, all the softwares have a measuring tool. When you measure that object, does it meet the measurement you expect it to be? If you're looking for a victim and you see a target that looks like a victim, but it measures out to 10 feet, it's probably a log. It's probably not your victim. And the last one is shadow. Does it have a shadow? The shadow you see in a side scan sonar image is actually the absence of data, because a sound wave that's being transmitted is not going through that object, so you're not getting a return in the area. There's a shadow. Out of all three of those, shape, size, shadow is the most reliable. For shape, we can talk you into a shape. It's like looking at a cloud. Hey, look at the cloud. It looks like this. Size, the measuring tools that are used is set by the operator to where to start and stop that measurement. So you can start and stop the measurement anywhere you want and make it the measurement you want to be on purpose or by accident. Shadow, you can't change. If there's a shadow there, there's something there that is making that sound wave not get to that part of the bottom. So shadow is the most reliable. Also, when you're out there side scanning and you're looking at these images all day, you're on the third day, been out there 10, 12 hours every day looking at side scan sonar, the shadows are the things that jump out at you. It's not the shapes, it's the shadows. So when you're running your side scan sonar, look for shadows. I've been on searches for victims where I didn't get a reflection of the victim. Only thing I got was the shadow. If it wasn't for that shadow, I would have never seen them on that sonar screen. So shape, side, shadow. That's how you interpret a side scan sonar image.
Very nice. John, you still do this stuff. You still are out. You do some law enforcement. I don't know if we can talk about what agency you work for.
Go ahead.
But you still do searches for victims and for boats and things like that that are sunk. Do you find yourself interpreting the data as you search, or do you do more of your data interpretation afterwards when you get back to the hotel room and you're looking at the data on the computer?
I do most of it while I'm watching, while I'm looking at the screen. I look for the data and I look for the target. And I have on the searches that I've been on for victims, the vast majority of them, I've seen them as they came on the screen. There are times where I've gone back to the hotel room and I reviewed data and got up in the morning and said, hey, we need to go take another look at this target. You know, I found it last night reviewing it. And that's why when you're running a side scan sonar, I emphasize saving everything. You can delete it later, but you can't save it if you've already been past it. So if your software has an option to save or not to save, make sure you select auto save and you save everything.
Perfect. And that kind of brings us to our next question, which is how do you, once you identify a target, how do you typically recommend getting a diver onto that target? Do you re-image it from different directions first? Are you using GPS strictly? What's your method?
I use the navigation tools that are in the software. The navigation, you're reading a GPS position. The GPS position that you read is the position of the antenna, of that GPS antenna. All softwares have a layback feature. I personally don't use a layback feature. Again, I go back to the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid method. So when I see a target and I image it, if my towfish is 100 feet behind me, I know the position of my GPS antenna. I know the position of the sonar image that's made with that towfish is going to be wrong. So let's say I'm on a northerly heading. I'm on a northerly heading. I see the target. I mark it. That puts a marker on my plotter. So I know that marker is at least 100 feet off. So I take my vessel out, and when you're doing these runs, you want to move out a distance. You don't want to just turn real short. You want to move out at least 100, 200 yards. So when you make that turn, you're not chasing your tail trying to get back online. Go out there about 200 yards, do a turn and do what's called a reverse course azimuth. What that means is you're running the same line opposite direction. Go down that line, and you can use your tools, your range finders, your range and bearing tools, and all those things, plus visually watching your plotter, and you can tell what side of your display that target's going to come on. As you get closer and you say, hey, it's coming down the right channel, it's going to be about 30 feet out. Make sure your range is at least greater than 30 feet. When you see it again, mark it again. Now you have two markers on your plotter. If you put a waypoint exactly in the middle of those two markers, that's the spot. Then recover your towfish, put it on deck, and then you rig up what I call a sonar target. A lot of times here at the ocean, they use a crab trap, which is a great sonar reflector. They put a buoy on it. And what I do to rig the buoy up is I don't tie the line onto the buoy. I run the line through the eye of the buoy. I put a 5-pound weight on the bitter end of the buoy so that that line plumbs the buoy. So the buoy is directly above the sonar cage. When you're towing a side scan, line is a dangerous thing in the water column. So now we go out, we have the cage rigged up, we drop it down on that waypoint that we put between the two range markers, get it down, get it set, put the towfish back in the water, go back by, now you have a visual buoy, go back by, image it, and you can look and see how close that cage is to the victim. You can either move it, you can measure it and say, hey, we're 12 feet out. You can go over and move the buoy, depending on the clarity of your water, confidence of your dive team, get it as close as you need to be. If you use side scan sonar correctly, you're searching with side scan, you're locating with side scan, you're marking with side scan, you're recovering with the diver, and your dive is going to be a bounce dive. Down the buoy line, there's your target, make your recovery.
All right. And just to clarify the buoy setup that you're talking about, you've got one end of the rope tied to the cage,
correct,
or the crab trap. It comes up and through an eyelet on the buoy,
correct,
and you've got a weight hanging there. And what that does is keeps the rope taut and keeps the buoy directly vertical above the crab trap.
That's correct. Because if we're working in 40 foot of water and I say, Justin, go get me a piece of line for 40 foot of water, most people are going to go get 60, 70 foot of water. Well, now you're going to have your crab trap here and your buoy over here somewhere. Well, when you're towing a towfish through there, you're probably going to snag that buoy line. And then you're going to have to re-rig everything and clean that mess up and get it back in. So the weight clump plumbs that buoy so it stays directly above the victim.
Perfect.
So what's the correct height of the towfish above the bottom, and how do you maintain this height?
The correct towfish height above the bottom is a rule of thumb. The basic rule of thumb is 10% of the range you're imaging on. And what I want people to know there is nowhere in that formula does it say anything about water depth. Many people call me up and say, John, I'm working in 40 foot of water. What should my height of towfish be? The formula says nothing about water depth. It doesn't matter if you're working in full ocean depth or you're working in a Mississippi River. The rule of thumb is 10% of the range you're imaging on. So if we're on a 70-foot range, the towfish should be about 7 feet above the bottom. It doesn't need to be exact, but that's kind of your rule of thumb. To keep the towfish the correct height above the bottom, it's a balancing act between how much cable you have out and the boat speed. The faster you tow, the more that towfish is coming up off the bottom. The slower, when you slow down, that towfish is going to sink and get closer to the bottom. So steady speeds, tow cable out. So,
John, to expand on that, if you have a varying depth, let's say your search area, the line that you're taking takes you from 40 feet to 70 feet in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you encourage slowing the boat down to get the towfish lower, or would you encourage paying out more line as you get deeper? Or do you say keep the towfish at the same level, which would give you sort of the towfish would get further and further from the bottom, but be on the same plane?
You know, there's a lot of bottoms that make life really difficult. And changing bottom levels is one of them that's very difficult. First thing I would try to do is I would try to get some idea of what the shape of the bottom is that we're going to work in. Is it shaped like a cereal bowl, or is it a gradual slope? If it's a gradual slope, I would try to stay running parallel where my towfish is working in a 40-foot depth throughout the entire line. And as I move away and I'm getting into deeper water, then I would deal with that by either slowing the boat down or putting more tow cable out. Now, you can't, not every body of water are you going to be able to do that. There are going to be times where things like you are describing happens and you're going from a shallow water to a deeper water or vice versa. So, you know, there's power reels out there that you can use. So as a towfish, you see that water column increasing in the sonar image, you can let out on the tow cable on the power reel, which makes life really easy. Some teams don't have the luxury of a power reel. If you don't, I recommend you getting one. If you get one, your guys will thank you. But if you have to hand it out as you go into deeper water, I would say try to keep your tow speed the same and just put more tow cable out.
I grinned because if Tom Greenhall watches this, he and I were on a search once where I was the power winch because I was young and dumb, and we ran parallel to the shore just like you recommended, trying to stay in the same depth, and couldn't find the victim. And we tried a different search direction, started shallow, went deep, and you know, they're barking orders at me, trying to keep the towfish the right height off. And I'll never forget, Tom said, "Got him." And we said, "Are you sure?" And he says, thick Boston accent. I think you know Tom.
I do.
He says, "If that ain't him, I'll eat my shorts." So, yeah, it's the power reel is definitely the way to go if you can afford one, and if you can't, write a grant and get one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So John, if you don't find the victim in the box search, but you still feel that it's there, what do you typically do?
That's a good question. And, you know, most times, especially if you're working in a pond, it's like this guy drowned in this pond. We know he's in there, but we searched everything, let's say in a north-south heading. We haven't found him. I say run east-west. There's an example of that quite a while ago, many years ago. I did a search in Oregon for a young man, and we were imaging, and I got a funky image. I'm like, I just couldn't explain it. So I marked it and I ran a 90-degree track the other direction across them, and boom, got a beautiful image of them. So if you don't get them on your first search and you have a lot of confidence that they should have been in that box, change directions if you can. Try, instead of running north-south, run east-west and recover that, and you may end up seeing them.
John, do you prefer to scan off of both sides, one side, situationally dependent?
You know, I would say most of my searches, I use both sides. They're there. I know there are some that cast from one side only, and that's fine. That works. I like both sides. You know, there are times where I only use one side. If I'm getting like we described earlier, a slope, sometimes when you're looking up a slope, because all that data gets back to the transducer about the same time, it might be really bright and you might not be able to get the gains down where you can get the resolution. So maybe I'll just use my one channel that's getting a good image. But I would say majority of the time I use both channels.
And final question here. What makes a team successful in training, and what's the biggest challenge to overcome in training a team?
We'll start with the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge that I get when I train a team is convincing teams that side scan sonar is not a monster. It's not scary. It's more intimidating looking than it is. It's a very simple system to operate, but it is a different skill than most law enforcement, fire departments, firemen have done, because, you know, most of them, you know, being a diver is a collateral job, so they're not used to that technology. But it's simple. The biggest thing is learning the software and getting some seamanship skills, learning how to tie proper knots. A typical side scan sonar crew is 3 people. Side scan sonar operator, the tender, which is guy that handles the towfish, puts it in the water, stops off the tow cable, and then the boat driver. Out of those 3 positions, the most difficult position of those 3, believe it or not, is driving a boat, because it's not easy to drive a boat in a straight line at slow speeds. Try to have your sonar operator set up shoulder to shoulder with your boat driver, because your boat driver is going to be taking you and doing that course. For training, what I try to recommend for teams is get as much knowledge before the training happens. When the instructor gets there, everybody's good with the side scan sonar while the instructor is standing on the boat, because the instructor is going to make sure you do it right, answer your questions, remind you where the buttons are. It's when the instructor leaves that you need to practice. And I can't emphasize enough is to get out there and practice and develop that muscle memory, so that when that instructor's not there, you have some skills to get out there. My phone is always available if you're out there side scanning and you need to call and you have a question, but get out there and practice.
And John, I know that, well, let's touch on a comment you just made about the instructor reminding you where the buttons are. Just like knots, shout out to Steve McGregor, who just logged on and is not a fan of tying knots. He just ties a lot. But it's a perishable skill, just like knots. And practice is one of those things that it's oftentimes difficult to convince an administration that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're trained in this. You have the certificate. John signed off and says you can find a crab trap with a sonar. So now you're a sonar operator. What sort of frequency of training do you think would be reasonable for a public safety team for their sonar operators and boat handlers?
I would like to see a minimum of quarterly. You know, for agencies that have the attitude that you're already been trained, I would say, well, when you go to a police academy, you get qualified, but you qualify on your weapon twice a year as well. So side scan sonar is one of those skills that you have your department depending on to accomplish, you know, evidence recovery or victim recovery. And if you want them to be proficient, they need to have the time to go out there and train and be proficient. I would say quarterly, if that's possible.
Right. And it's a balancing act. Obviously, you talked about water rescue being an ancillary duty. You know, we struggle trying to convince administrations to give divers enough time to practice. But like you say, in order to remain proficient, I think it's important that you not only get good training, but continue with good training.
Absolutely.
So you and I spoke offline when we were setting up this interview, and you graciously agreed to do this. I realized that you didn't want to make this about any specific company or product, but if people are curious about the products that EdgeTech offers, do you have a specific public safety unit that you would recommend, or is that more situationally dependent that you'd want to consult with them first?
They can contact EdgeTech anytime. Our website's simple. It's edgetech.com, or they can also contact Dive Rescue. Dive Rescue knows how to get a hold of us, knows how to get the equipment information. I've been aligned with Dive Rescue for many years, and if I call Dive Rescue, and some of my old friends at Dive Rescue, Blades Robinson and Pete, many times to get answers. So contact Dive Rescue, and they'll certainly be able to get a hold of me as well.
And I hate to show our age here, John, but I think it's in the decades now, not just in the years that you've been aligned with us. Yeah. We've gone through the questions that we had. Let's wrap it up with, do you have any anecdotal stories about things that you found that you weren't exactly looking for? That's one of my favorite things about sonar, is that sometimes you find mysteries when you're trying to solve others.
There was a case that happened I was involved with here in Virginia. They were looking for a male murder victim. Well, we went out, and this had been in the water for a while, found what we were looking for, recovered it. I was vacating the scene before it came up out of the water because I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. Well, the about a day or two after that, they called me up and said, "Hey, John, we examined that victim, and it was a female. So we were looking for a male." So it's like, okay, well, I guess I could come back out now. So that's I can't think of anything fun offhand, but that's just one example. One thing I would like to explain: a lot of people get confused when they look at a side scan sonar. What are they looking at? You know, what is the black area in a side scan sonar? So I made this little thing. It's a side scan sonar. Let me see if I can keep it on the screen. That I folded. Now, what you got to remember when you're side scanning is you're side scanning in a three-dimensional world, but you're putting it on a two-dimensional screen. So in the real world, this is what it looks like. You got your towfish up here, you got your water column right here, and you got your side scan sonar there. That's what it looks like in a real world. But when you put it on a two-dimensional screen, this is what it looks like. So I hope that explains, because a lot of people ask me about that black area, which some people call the nadir zone, which is probably the right term for it, underneath the towfish. It's actually the water column under the towfish. Is there a blind spot? Probably is a blind spot. If you image something directly underneath that first bottom return of that image, probably not going to be a good image because we're using side scan. We're not using bottom scan. But you probably will see something. But that's what you're looking at when you're looking at a side scan.
It's a great visual. Thanks for sharing that, John.
Yep.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us today. It was very informative. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John, great seeing you again. Great talking with you again. And for all of you watching, John is available. He answers his phone anytime, day or night. I'm sorry to throw it out there, John, but regardless of what system you are using, if you need some help, give John a call, give us a call here at the office, and we'll put you in touch with somebody who can help you with your specific needs. John, thanks again for jumping on here this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
All right.